Flank.
Dayspring.
Who do we have on the podcast today?
We have the legendary writer of Uncanny and Adjectiveless X-Men and Exiles and so much more that we don't even get into, Mr. Chuck Austen.
It is like 2 hours worth of an interview. And if we, folks at home, if we sound a little tired, it's because we have been on Zoom for 2 hours dissecting every single panel of Chuck Austen's time on the X books. And we didn't even get everything. Like you said, we didn't even get everything.
We didn't even get to everything. And when we say that we dived into every single panel, Dayspring, you specifically dived into every single panel, teeny, tiny ones that nobody else remembers.
Okay, no, wait, bitch. Hang on one second. Because there's a teeny little panel of Iceman in his room looking at a photo of Nurse Annie and him at Pilar's and Havoc's wedding, which we know how that ends out. And also of him and Pilar's. So, and that scene always stuck in my head. And I need to ask him. But of course, because if anyone would ask us, what did we do this morning? I'd be like, bitch, I don't remember. So we're asking Chuck, tell us about this teeny little panel, or I'm asking Chuck about this teeny little panel that happened 20 years ago. Of course he doesn't remember, but he was able to give a good answer for why he would write something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I can't imagine how difficult it is for the people that we interview to tolerate our questions or to give us like the well thought out answers that we want, because we're asking about things that happened months, years, decades ago. I mean, we go there. This is powers of where we go there.
It would be like me asking you right now, tell me about a paper you wrote your freshman year of college, and you would be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, definitely could not happen. It's weird. I probably could tell you more about like a paper I wrote in high school, but college, no, I don't know.
So he was on Uncanny X-Men. Hang on, I wrote like really quick notes about it. He was on Uncanny X-Men. Started in 410 after Joe Casey, which we cover in there, and then ended at 443. He worked with Salvador Larroca, Phil Tan, and Kia Ashimiya. That very manga anime look for some issues. But what was interesting, this is something that we talked about, and I think was one of my favorite questions that you tackled, was he started off during the Morrison era and then went all the way through to the Reloaded Whedon. I mean, that is a substantial time in the X books.
It is a really different time in the X books, because the X-Men had gained like a new notoriety because of the movies. So there were a lot of eyes on the X books, and they were really trying like a lot of new and different things in each book. They are all still called X-Men. We didn't have X-Force, Excalibur, X-Factor, blah blah blah. It was just all variations on X-Men. And they all had their own special thing going. It was a really fun and different time in the X books. And of course, it's when you and I became friends.
Oh, I know. Well, that's why, like, I think that era of X books is always going to resonate hard with me because, we were reading these books now as adults. We were coming back to, I was coming back to the books.
I was coming back to them as well.
I came back during Murder at the Mansion. When Morrison, when they wrote that epic 3-parter. And I remember seeing, I think Angel, his version of Angel, Chuck Austen's version of Angel, is in the background when Bishop is holding the bullet. And then I went to, what was going on in Uncanny and everything. So it's always, I'm always going to think of going on to the Foosh, talking to someone called Ultimate Phoenix.
I don't know her.
Jean Grey with the goatee. You keep saying it was supposed to be a reference to Rachel in the Ultimate Verse, but it was not, because you're Jean Grey with the goatee.
It was Jean.
But okay, wait. Before we get into the interview, because we can ramble about the interview, I kind of want to turn the tables and interview you. Really, I know. Look at that.
Oh no.
Well, we had our falling out, and you've come back into the Pox Familia, and you've had so many exciting things going on, and I'm like so proud of you. And did something happen recently? Did you get a new job? Are you like officially in the, I don't know, business?
Oh my God. Oh my God. Well, yes, I did. I have started a new job. I'm working for the largest auction house in the United States, which is Heritage Auctions. And to your point, I am somewhat I'm industry adjacent. I'm not writing or drawing comic books, but I am a comic book professional. I am a comic book and comic art cataloger, which is kind of it's a little hard to describe, but I'll do the best. So essentially, over the last couple of years, the demand for rare or certified comic books from like CGC and original comic art has sort of skyrocketed, and Heritage has sort of been at the front of that surge in demand. Last year, I think they told me they did, or I work there. Hello. Did $181 million just in comic book auctions, which was more than double the amount the year before, which was already a record breaker. So people were home cleaning out their closets, sending the stuff to Heritage, selling it to people like me, sitting around with nothing to do during a pandemic. But so far as like, what my job is, essentially, there's a whole department of comic book nerds doing and a bunch of different tasks to prepare for the auction. And I'm just going to tell you kind of how it all works and how I fit into it. So essentially, we have the consignment directors who work with the clients to bring in the comics, the comic art, sometimes toys and other fun stuff. Then we have an in-house team of comic graders who evaluate the goods, arrange things in group lots, and then send like the best of it to CGC to certify as its own lot. And then me, how I fit into all of this, which was, of course, the question that I'm now giving the world's longest answer to.
I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it.
So then me and the rest of the catalogers then get a chance to examine things. So that we can enter all the tech information, how big something is, how old it is, who published it, manufactured it. We determine the value of it using the Overstreet price guide. And then I also get to write a description of what's being offered and why it's the coolest thing in the world. So, at the end of the day, essentially, I'm being paid to research and write about comic books.
Woo!
So it is absolutely a dream come true. I've really been enjoying the work. I've really been enjoying the people that I work with. Now, I do have to clarify now that I am something resembling a comic book professional who also has the side gig speaking about comic books in the industry for fun. I have to add my little disclaimer that everything I
you're
say,
that person now.
Everything I say is my own opinion and not the opinion of Heritage Auctions.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We know you're only speaking on behalf of yourself. So, you know what I just realized also, well, I kind of knew this already. We're also in like the same industry.
Yeah, I was going to say
with auctions. That's it. Like you can't.
We both work in auctions.
You can't get rid of me. I'm at the tail end of that spectrum. I'm the auctioneer who inherits what you write, and then I sort of put my own spin on it when I'm on stage, and I call out the numbers, and then I sell it for hopefully triple its worth.
Yeah, which does happen quite regularly. I think we just sold the first issue of Luke Cage Power Man for like, I want to say like 50 times what the price guide value is. It was absolutely insane. So hats off to you and fellow auctioneers for really getting that adrenaline going. I actually went to my first live auction at Heritage, live comic book auction at Heritage last week. And when I tell you the energy in there was nuts. And like all that comes down to the person with the microphone, comes down to you. So like, I have a newfound respect for what you do.
Do you remember during the pandemic when we were fighting every day and I was going crazy? Is because it is an adrenaline going on stage and doing an auction. And pre-pandemic, I was doing one like every other night. I mean, the bookings were insane. So to all of a sudden, literally overnight, have that taken away, it is like losing that drug. But I'm so glad you're part of the auction scene, especially with comic books.
It's
At
wild.
auctioneering college, the highest grossing industry for auctions is cars, which I'm not a car auctioneer. They are very different. But hearing those numbers for comic, and comic book memorabilia auctions, that's insane. That is very, very lucrative, and they are lucky to have you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I really, like I said, I really enjoy doing it. And I hope that, I have a long, happy career with Heritage. But I will say the biggest challenge is, of course, having all of these amazing things come across my desk. And I want to bid, on all of them. But most things I could never, ever, ever dream of affording. But,
And because I'm such an idiot, I was like, "Oh, do you get an employee discount?" Like you would get an employee discount on a lot that's being bid. Like it
yeah.
doesn't make any sense.
It's all consignments, so there's no discount offered to employees, unfortunately. So I have only been able to make one splurge in my month there, but I do expect that there will be some more art joining this wall behind me that you listeners can't see, that I'm gesturing to wildly. But no, I'm really loving it.
Okay, well, listen, we can keep on rambling, as people know, for hours, but we've already rambled for 2 hours, and folks at home are about to embark on a very, very deep dive of Chuck Austen's time on
The
Uncanny
deepest.
X-Men and Adjectiveless X-Men. Let's just plug our socials right now. I'm at Power of X-Men.
I'm at Flinkman, and I'm not doing anything too exciting on there, but if a cool comic comes across my desk, I'll be sure and share it when I can.
All right, guys, enjoy this interview with Chuck Austen.
Today, we have on legendary Uncanny X-Men and Adjectiveless X-Men writer, Mr. Chuck Austen. Hello, Chuck. How's it going, man?
It's good. It's good. Flink, Day, Spring. It's very nice to meet both of you. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for asking me.
No, thank you for accepting. We have been obsessed with your run since 2000, and I cannot believe 2002 was when you were on the X books.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah. That's that's about when I left, was 2002, 2003.
So we got to ask, we're going to just dive into all these questions we have, because we have 4 pages of notes.
Okay.
Try and keep it tight. We'll try and keep it tight.
We're going to try to keep it a little tight here. But, Chuck, the first question we want to ask is, how did your run on Uncanny X-Men come about?
It came about because I had sold US War Machine to Marvel, and the editorial office that handled it was was shared an office with the X guys. So Mark Powers and Pete Franco at the time were the editors on the books, and they had been reading War Machine, really liked what I was doing, and asked if I would be interested in writing the X-Men after Joe Casey decided to leave. So I said, yeah, sure. I mean, it was my favorite comic as a kid, so I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. But yeah, it was a little nerve-wracking, but I actually wound up enjoying it quite a bit.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. My life's dream probably would be to write for an X-Men comic. So to just have somebody casually ask me, "Hey, you feel like writing the X-Men?" I mean, I would probably faint. I'm really not sure how you didn't. But in addition to Uncanny X-Men, you did also migrate from that to Adjectiveless X-Men, which was a shorter run. Was that always meant to be a one-off arc? Was that always meant to be as short as it wound up being?
I when I got the questions, I was hoping to be able to research some of this stuff, because it's 20 years and I don't remember everything. But I didn't remember which arc had gotten moved, because it wasn't always originally intended to be an Adjectiveless X-Men. Is that the one where they go back to the island?
Yeah, so it was Day of Adam, and it was where Gambit goes blind, and it definitely is part of your Uncanny story. It's just because I guess it was a Reloaded era, and they were starting, to bring back Adjectiveless from, I think, Flint, correct me if I'm wrong, from New X-Men, it went back to Adjectiveless.
It went back to Adjectiveless, and then they shuffled Claremont from Extreme to Uncanny, and then Astonishing was launched with Whedon as the flagship of the line at that point. So that's the era I'm talking about. But yeah, as Dayspring mentioned, it was the arc where Gambit lost his sight.
Okay. I honestly don't remember that story. I'm sorry. I tried to find it online, but I couldn't. So I can't remember it. I don't remember writing a Gambit loses his sight story. Was that mine?
Yeah. With Salvador LaRocca was there. I think you were doing mostly setup, if I remember correctly. Hang on a second. Let me just double check this. Day of Adam. Chuck. You definitely have the writing credit for it. Yeah, Day of Adam. Chuck Austen right there. It was literally like he was like holding a card and it exploded in his face. Is sort of how it happened. And then it got retconned like 3 issues later.
Okay. Yeah, I honestly, I'm not sure. It's funny because I remember most of the stories when somebody reminds me. I remember the Ultimate X-Men Gambit 2-parter, but I don't remember that story. Oh God, it's so sad. I'm getting so old.
Listen, it would be us, that's for sure.
No, we are asking you a story that you wrote like 20 years ago. I don't think it's fair if someone asked me what I did this morning, I'd be like, oh,
yeah.
But I don't know if maybe how I mean, I don't want to like speak for editorial or anything, but like I don't know if like maybe they put your name on it and it was something else. But hang on, I have the cover right here. Maybe that will jog your memory. And let me just make sure that in the book it says your name, because it says it on the app and the cover. Yep, by Chuck Austen. It's this. This is the cover if you remember.
Oh, actually, I do remember that cover.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my phone is.
I loved working with Sal. I don't remember.
Yeah, he's wearing a blindfold there, if you can see that.
Yeah, wow. I just don't remember. God, this is so sad.
No, it's not.
First question out of the gate, and I don't remember anything.
It is not.
I mean, literally, to ask me what I was doing 20 years ago, no clue. So no.
But you know what? You're probably when you're saying that they went back to Genosha, that was what in my head canon was your last issue, which we'll talk about later on. But that is when Magneto had just died in New X-Men, and they were bringing the coffin over. And I forgot you had done Day of Adam because they had migrated over to adjectiveless.
And you had asked the questions about Annie and Carter. That was the last page of the last thing that I wrote, so that's how I remember it. But
and that appeared in Day of Adam because I thought it appeared at the end of the Genosha story, but it was actually in Day of Adam. That's why poor Flink was getting all these DMs from me at like 3 a.m. because I couldn't sleep the other night, and I was like, I'm trying to find everything here.
I went to bed with the list of questions being like 5 from me, maybe 10 from him, to being like 30 overall. I was like, okay, we're going to have a pretty good comprehensive interview here.
Yeah.
But so that jumping back to the uncanny era really quick. That was when your co-writers, not co-writers, but your fellow writers in the X office were Chris Claremont and Grant Morrison. Yeah. What was it like with them? Did you have any collaboration? Did you interact all that much? You have any of these like X retreats they talk about now?
I wasn't involved in any X retreats. We were all pretty much separate. I met Grant a couple of times at a couple of conventions. Very happy to talk to me, especially because we usually were sitting next to each other at autograph table, which is awesome. And Claremont and I, we actually, I think it was a little awkward at first when I first started writing, but we eventually became very friendly, and I remember patting him on the back and telling him, dude, look what you created when we were watching the previews for the X-Men movie. And he was just like bursting with joy. He was so overwhelmed. So we had a nice relationship, but we never actually worked together. We just would run into each other at cons. I ran into him once at the Marvel office, and he was very kind to remind me that I was the most hated man online.
Oh, well, not in this circle. I hope you can feel the love from the Power of X-Men community, because we really enjoy your run. It's full of a lot of great characters and great ideas, and it was different to what Claremont and Morrison were doing. And I'm the kind of person who really likes some variety and some diversity in my X-Men books. I like each of them to have their own niche. And, I think you had that. And, whether or not it's to everybody's taste, I can't say, but I certainly was a huge fan of it. So,
Oh, well, thanks.
Wait, and Chuck, are you telling us that an X-Men writer was getting hate online? Gasp! Never have heard that before.
Yeah, but you got to remember, this was the early days of the internet, and I think I was sort of the first one to get really, really savaged. After I was gone, I hear everybody got it, but just I was kind of the test subject, as it were, and I didn't always handle it well. I would do interviews and I would say controversial things, and because I didn't think anybody was reading or paying attention, and so I would just sort of say whatever came to mind. I was a lot less political since I've been working in television now. I've learned to be much more diplomatic and much more polite about the way I put things. So some of that I brought on myself. Some of it was just, it was the time. It was really the online fans kind of finding their feet and recognizing that they had a little bit of power. There were people, and it's funny that you had mentioned before when you were asking me about this interview about Juggernaut, the hatred for Juggernaut was intense, absolutely intense.
Wow. That's wild. I mean, we're gonna definitely, we definitely have some character related questions. So I'll save my total Juggernaut gushing for later. But like, that is like one of my favorite things that you did was bring him into the fold.
Oh, well, thank you.
But like Dayspring and I, we actually met on a message board about, I guess, somewhere between 17, 20 years ago. I'm not sure of the exact timeline at this point. And I actually, I think the hate you were getting was definitely more in the message boards. I think all of that was like kind of like a pre-Twitter scenario. And that message boards were so toxic, and that I found them to be so toxic in that time that I actually never got involved in Twitter because I was so put off by the toxicity coming from the message boards that I was just like, oh my God, we're going to give people only 180 characters. They're going to be harsher than ever before.
They have to be brevity. It's brevity now. But Chuck, to give you an idea, because of how vitriolic those message boards were, it turned me off from comics for a while. And, when we started creating like a space for ourselves here on Instagram and the podcast community, we wanted somewhere that it was just like, listen, we are not here to be hateful. Like, we love X-Men and we love the stories behind everything. We don't want to be angry like that. I mean, that's not, it's so sad that the loudest on Twitter usually is seen as being emblematic of a group, but it's not. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I absolutely know what you mean. And over time, I began to recognize that as I would run into people and they would say, I was one of those people that loved your writing, but I didn't want to say anything online because I would get attacked. So I started to sort of see that, and we're seeing that still now in a lot of the political situation that's going on, but there's this sort of tendency to go towards the bullying side when people feel like they're losing, and nobody wants to fight against a bully. So ultimately it makes the bully win.
Yeah.
It's funny. That was some of the stuff that I wanted to deal with Juggernaut and Sammy too. So,
we got feels on Juggernaut and Sammy,
both of them.
But wait. So you came in during the Morrison era after Joe Casey and Ian Churchill. Well, Ian left before Casey, but you came in there, and then you also started. You ended at with the Whedon era, which was the Reloaded era. What was like the vibe like during that transition to go from Morrison, which was a very gritty, reaction to the movies, take on the comic books, to the Astonishing era, which was more embracing the superhero elements?
Yeah. It was interesting because for the most part, they let us do our own thing. And what they found is that people would gravitate towards one book or another, depending on their sort of personal tastes. And the sales were, as much as Grant was like, the kingmaker and the godmaker there, my sales, I was shocked to find out, were only about 5,000 apart. Wow. So the sales all stayed in the same relative area. I lost a lot of sort of the diehard continuity fans, but I gained a lot of new readers or old readers who hadn't read the comics in a long time. So it became a wash. And in fact, I would get the most surprising thing of all was I would get women coming up to me at cons and saying, I started reading comics because of you, and I got my mom to read them too. So it was really what Marvel asked me to do, was to try to broaden out the audience and try to reach out beyond the kind of the typical X fans, because I was sort of the third tier guy. They wanted to see how far we could kind of push it and go. And it seemed to work out in a lot of ways. They got a lot of new fans that they hadn't expected to get at all. So, I think in some ways it worked, but there was not a guided or a concerted effort to make the books one way or the other. Grant, they wanted to do whatever sort of fun, weird, gritty, unusual stories were. And then they wanted, Joe Casey to do sort of his dark and gritty, realistic stuff, and they wanted me to do sort of the kind of the more remote, romantic, heartfelt kind of stuff. So that's kind of just sort of, they were happy with whatever we were doing as long as people were reading it.
Romantic, heartfelt stuff like Nurse Annie kissing Havoc in Paris. We got Nurse Annie questions.
I'm sure
Listeners,
you do.
Buckle up. I'm sorry, Flink, I cut you off.
No, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. I'm always gonna give you your moment for Nurse Annie. So like the one sort of constant, creators, the writers, they shift around, but the one constant, I think, at least if my memory serves, during your era was Joe Quesada as the editor in chief of Marvel. Did some of those directives about you having the romance book and Whedon having the kind of weird and gritty book, did that come from Joe Quesada, or was that more of a micro in the X Office thing?
No, it was actually, I would say it was more of a micro in the X Office thing. Joe was bigger. He would look at the sales and say, okay, something's not working here. We need to make an adjustment. He wouldn't necessarily, at least that's how my experience of working with him.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you just wouldn't find out. Like one day I got a call and Brian Bendis was on the Avengers and I wasn't, it just happens.
Yeah.
But with the X books, as long as they were selling and holding their own, and he was getting the same thing I was getting. He was getting new readers coming up to him at conventions and saying, I read Uncanny X-Men, but I don't read any other Marvel book. And so he recognized that there was value in it. So he was perfectly fine to kind of let me do what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And everybody else too, I think. I mean, I don't think anybody told Grant what to do.
Yeah, and it shows in the work. I mean, everybody was doing their own thing. Everybody had their own vibe, and I feel like it wasn't quite as homogenous as it kind of can be at times when there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And that's kind of why, Dayspring and I have such an affinity for that era is because, it was fun. It was different. Everything kind of had its own vibe.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm curious, Chuck, do you think that editorial is probably very different now, given the rise of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and these characters now potentially all of them having billion-dollar potential there? Do you think it was easier back then to get away with, some of the stories you told versus today?
It was much easier. I mean, I don't know about today. I haven't really talked to anybody in the X offices or the Marvel offices. So I don't know. Once I walked away from comics, I pretty much walked away. So, any questions that you have after I left, I don't know that I have an answer to, because I wasn't paying attention to what, like Chris was doing or other people were doing. But there at the time, I mean, one of the reasons why I didn't feel like I wanted to stay and write, it was my choice to leave when I finally left Uncanny and left Marvel. They were going through internal changes already because of the movies and because they were getting sold in Target stores. So they had to be really careful about what they put in. And I actually had a conversation with Mike Martz at one point where he wouldn't let me do a scene. He didn't want me to do a scene in one of the books that had already been done in Giant Size X-Men #1. So I thought, but wait a minute, this has already been done. He says, yeah, but we couldn't sell that in a Target store now. So it became more restrictive, the things that you could do, and they had much more specific ideas. So and I didn't enjoy it. I liked having a little bit of that free. I liked writing sort of the weirdy Twilight Zone-esque kind of stories with a heart.
Well, Flink knows where I'm going to go with this, because the Target edition of the Emma Frost solo omitted a lot of the LGBTQIA plus romance between
Oh,
her brother
really?
Christian. Yeah. So if you look at it, they have like a couple panels where they're holding hands and stuff like that. And it's gone. It was omitted. And I remember when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's weird. I used to work in book publishing, so I get it. They edited it for that. But I was like, that's so weird with Marvel. My follow-up question to this is, what was the scene that you couldn't make it in, that was in giant size, but you couldn't redo?
I think there was a kind of a reboot just before I left, and if I remember correctly, it was Havoc was giving a tour to somebody of the mansion, and there was a scene where he goes in and Storm is
in her garden,
in her garden, and he said, "No, she can't be naked." And I said, "But she's been naked. She was, as far back as the early X-Men, Chris Claremont and John Byrne days." And he said, "We can't do that anymore." So. And I'm somebody who likes to push the limits a little bit. I like to go outside the box with what I'm doing. So it just became more, they needed things done a specific way, and I didn't want to write that way.
That scene lives rent-free in my head because I can picture LaRocca did the art. Havoc is walking through the garden and Storm stops him. And she's here like, you were told that you can't go through this. It was posted on the bulletin board last week.
Yeah.
And because I revisited your art this week, I was like, oh my God, do you remember like when you would post things on the bulletin board in school? And now you're like, if it's not on my Discord or like our DM group chat, like it doesn't even register, it was definitely very emblematic of a certain time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I love doing that stuff because it reminded, it was like, well, it's a school, these are things that people have to deal with. How does Xavier get teachers? And that led to North Star. So,
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely get to North Star in a second, but you mentioned
keep getting ahead of you. Sorry.
Oh, no. You mentioned pushing boundaries. You like to push boundaries a little. You like to do things a little bit outside of the box. And, I think you definitely accomplished that when you run, especially in some of your character work. Were you given like free reign to significantly impact your cast origins, such as like you contributed, majorly to both Polaris and Nightcrawler, who are these iconic X-Men characters, and you changed their backstory significantly? Was there any pushback to that?
As long as they thought the stories were good, they were perfectly okay with it. I would come to them and ask them questions about the origin and what about this and what about that, or the past history. With Lorna, I kind of inherited crazy Lorna because Grant made her insane after the Genosha thing, and so I had different story in mind for her before he did that, and so I was kind of adjusting on the fly, and I kind of liked the direction that it was going, and so I wanted to kind of really hammer in her origin and tie her closer to Magneto, because I thought it would give her greater power and authority as somebody who you didn't know which way she was going to go at this point.
Yeah.
So
what was your original vision for Lorna? Where did you want to take her before you realized she was cray cray because she witnessed the entire genocide of Genosha? But when you were drafting your notes for Polaris, where did you want to take her?
Well, we were going to have her and Havoc come together and then talk about getting married, and then actually have a marriage ceremony that went wrong when they realized in a lot of ways that they weren't meant to be together, because obviously one of the things that sells well is weddings, deaths, and returns of favorite villains. So Mike said, if you want to do a wedding, we can do a wedding. And I said, well, maybe we could do Havoc and Lorna get together, and but can we do it differently? Can we have it not work out? And he said, yeah, we can do that. How come, what do you have in mind? I says, I don't know. Let me give it some thought. And then I think it was literally a week or a month later, Grant made Lorna insane. And I thought, okay, this is how we make it work. And there was always the intention of having, it's what I call a viewpoint character. It's like a new character that you bring in that kind of sees the environment fresh for new readers to sort of reintroduce them to the situation. So Sammy and Annie were intended to be kind of viewpoint characters. Sammy was a mutant who desperately wanted to be a part of it, and Annie was a human who didn't understand the world, but knew that it probably would benefit her because she knew that her son had some abilities that she'd been trying to keep hidden. So so we decided to make Annie the one that Havoc had a relationship with, but I wanted to make it a little, I never like to take things in a sort of a straight direction. So we made Annie a very lonely person who gets kind of caught in a very embarrassing moment in the beginning by all of the other X-Men. And I wanted to sort of set that as the tone. And Xavier, being the mind reader and sort of understanding the situation, and also understanding that Alex was probably getting something out of it too, decides to sort of the same way that he decides to bring North Star, and he decides to bring Annie in. And I think in some ways he senses the gift in Carter. So he's trying to help her out in some of those ways as well. At least that was the original intent.
Well, I think it's there. Definitely when we were revisiting your arc this week, the first thing I noted, and it's in our questions later on, but Sammy, you start off your arc or your story with Sammy there. Yeah. And he very much is the point of view character. I'm also connecting now why Annie and North Star, for you editorially, you kind of put them together because of Xavier and what we were saying about bringing in more people. It's just, it's so interesting to have these conversations and see how you as a writer piece things together because we like to have really good tea. Is there any other story that you had thought of that you wanted to pitch, but it just didn't come to fruition, or another writer got there before it, or you had to course correct because the character was different?
I mean, it happened a lot. There were I know this is one of your questions later, and sorry, I keep getting ahead of you guys, but
no,
we edit as we go along. Don't worry.
Yeah, go for
it. Juggernaut happened because I couldn't have Peter. Peter was spoken for, and I wanted muscle on the team. Yeah. And so we were trying to figure out who I could get to replace Peter. And I said, how about Juggernaut? I'd really like to turn him, because I had read J2, and I thought it was part of the continuity, that it was supposed to be the future, that he winds up getting married and having a kid and being sort of a positive role model for his son. And so I wanted to kind of bridge those two pieces of continuity. And I really liked I think it's no secret online that I had some difficulties as a child, and I wanted to take some of that knowledge that I had gained over the years and use it as part of what Juggernaut went through, because I know he had the same backstory. So putting him and Sammy together was sort of the natural way to go, because it helped. It brought Juggernaut in and connected him emotionally to somebody when he didn't want to connect emotionally to anybody else. And it afforded him the opportunity to be to Sammy what Sammy wasn't getting from his own father. So that was where I was going with that. I liked it actually better. In the end, I was glad that I was able to use him instead of Peter. And all the hatred and the online fuming about it aside, I'm still very proud of the way that all turned out. One of my favorite stories is him going home and wrecking his house, while Sammy sort of watches, like, what the hell are you doing?
Well, that's so beautiful, because I mean, obviously it's heartbreaking with what happens later on with Sammy. It's how do you take this character like Juggernaut, who's desperate for connections and is making this connection with Sammy? What's, as a writer telling a story, what's the worst thing you can do to Juggernaut? Something happens to Sammy. And that was, I remember reading that, horrifying.
Not just something happening to Sammy. He was killed by Black Tom, who was Kane's former best friend. Like, that is a heart-wrenching, horrible situation, like, all around. And it was absolutely gut-wrenching to read. I really think you if your intent was to break our hearts, you did. It worked. It really worked.
Like, I mean, that was the intent. I mean, I've joked about it since then, but Sammy was created to die.
Yeah.
He was always intended to go to be the thing that pushes Juggernaut over the edge into being more heroic and making that final break with Black Tom. Now, the thing that I didn't understand at the time is, it's Marvel and things go back the way they were. It's like I think you just said it got retconned a month later with something that I had done. Some of that you sort of expect. But at the time, you sort of believe that you're going to have this real ability to kind of make this happen. And if you do a strong enough job with it, maybe it'll stick with people. And that one was an important one to me.
Well, I will say, I will say, Juggernaut being a hero has essentially gone untouched. I mean, he's had some moments of villainy or here. Like the only time I can really think off the top of my head that he's been a full-on rampaging bad guy is when he was possessed by, it was whatever the motivator for the Fear Itself crossover was. We're like 10 crossovers removed. I can't keep it straight, but there was some evil motivating force motivating him to destroy San Francisco, and the X-Men all had to team up to stop him. And that's really the only time that he's been a full-on rampaging villain since your run. And he's currently hanging out with the X-Men on Krakoa as like one of the few non-mutants allowed to live there, doing heroic things. So, that particular bit of your legacy really has lived on. So, and I, forget what all the toxic fans on the message boards were saying. I thought that was an incredibly interesting turn for the character. His relationship with Xavier, his stepbrother, had evolved so much over the years that it didn't feel so out of left field to me, and to hear that your motivations, like one of your motivations for it, aside from the personal stuff, which of course is great, and I appreciate you sharing that with us, but I read all of J2 back in the 90s or early 2000s, and I loved it. So hearing that you were trying to build a bridge to that, like, makes me love it like 10 times more than I already did.
Oh, cool.
Wait, I don't know J2. I'm like Googling it right now.
It's from the same universe. It was like in the same universe as like Spider-Girl.
Oh,
it was like the next generation of Marvel heroes. And J2 was Juggernaut's son. I can see him so vividly. He had like a shiny chrome helmet, a black outfit, and like a flannel around his waist.
Okay, we're gonna pin that, and we're getting back to it eventually. Future episode. Wait, Chuck, though. So speaking of sons, you named Carter after friends of the podcast, and we did a panel with them at San Diego Comic-Con. Eric and Julia Leewald. You named Carter after their older son, so you're friends with the Leewalds. I'm friends with the Leewalds. I have been for, oh my God, like 30 years now, I guess. It's been a really long time. I met them actually through my ex-wife. She had known them for years. They all lived in the same neighborhood, and their kid, my ex-wife had 2 children from a previous marriage, and she had 2 girls, they had 2 boys, and they used to walk their kids in strollers together and hang out. So when I met my ex, we started hanging out with the Leewalds, and I've stayed friends with them. My ex-wife and I had an amicable divorce, and remained friends with most of the people that I knew. And I actually just had lunch with the Leewalds today, and they told me to tell you hello.
Awesome.
So yeah, no, they're great. I love them. And Carter has always been like a little buddy of mine. We would talk about stuff, and he was a big comics fan. He loved Juggernaut. His best friend Juggernaut is his absolute favorite character. And so I named Carter after him, and it was just like my little tip of the hat to the Leewalds.
That's so
cool. That was after they had already finished their X-Men run. So
X-Men writers showing other X-Men writers love. We love to see it. We love to see it. So I assume maybe that you have seen their work on the animated series.
I've seen a little bit of it. I'm older than that, so
well, yeah.
So I wasn't really into animation at the time, but I've seen several episodes, and I've read Eric's book, which has actually been incredibly helpful. I was just telling Eric today, it's been very helpful to me as a showrunner, because he writes about things in there that I've had to deal with, and he has like suggested solutions for how he dealt with them, and it's actually been really beneficial. It's a great book.
the art, and then the one that they didn't self-publish it, but they had a smaller press for it that's like this big. That is like before we got the nice one that came out 2 years ago. That was the one everyone was reading. You got every morsel of information there.
Yeah, it's great stuff in there. Yeah.
Well, you have just over a year to catch up on the Leewald's work before the continuation series X-Men 97 debuts next October. So hopefully maybe you can check that out. I know we're excited for it. The X-Men fans are all excited for it for sure.
I mean, I'm excited for them. I mean, I especially since it apparently picks up right at the end of their run. So now I have to watch them all so that it'll make sense to me when I watch it. So
we have nothing but love for the Leewalds. The way that they were able to take the complex, stories and character arcs from 30 years of comics at that point and boil it down to an audience that, where 7-year-olds could understand it was just genius. They were so good.
Well, but that's also where I see a lot of their influence in She-Ra, because that She-Ra reboot, we'll talk about that later, but that She-Ra reboot was smart. It told really good stories. It highlighted a very diverse cast, and it also was able to take the She-Ra mythos and streamline it. And that's not easy, because as a She-Ra fan from like the 80s, there's not much mythos there. It's no hate on the OG She-Ra, because I love OG She-Ra, but it was a bit thin. And what you delivered in Netflix, you were the executive producer.
I was, but I should make it clear that I was really there as Noel's support and the writer's support. I gave notes on stories and how to like push the emotion in them, not even in the board stage, not even really to change script stuff. So I have to give Noel and the writers all the credit for the direction of the series and where they went with it. I'll take some credit for helping helping them to achieve their vision. And thank God for Mattel and for DreamWorks for allowing them to end it the way that they did, to being able to lay pipe for all of that stuff so that it made sense when we got to the ending. So I'll take some of that credit, but I got to give that's credit where credit is due. Those writers were fantastic. I loved working with them. I still love their writing. I can tell when I see a show that it's better written than most others, because they're just so talented. But so it's sorry to disappoint, but I came in actually like episode 8, I think, or some 8 or 9 had just been delivered, and we still hadn't even sent overseas episode 12 or 13. So I got involved there, and it was really more just to kind of help Noelle to kind of get it out the door. She was
shout out to Noelle, because excellent series, and all the writers and all of you involved.
Yeah,
I haven't seen it, and y'all just sold me on it. So I'll have to check it. I'll check it out.
It always baffles me that you didn't grow up on She-Ra.
I didn't. He-Man and She-Ra. I was like 1 or 2 years late in the 80s, just born a little late for I think the He-Man and She-Ra boom. So okay. So we've touched on, a couple of characters that you have, that you had on your cast, but my personal favorite of the characters, I have a holy trinity of X-Men characters, and it's Dazzler, Emma Frost, and then Havoc, who you were the first writer to inherit him post his stint leading a team of alternate universe, like dark X-Men over in Mutant X. Was he someone you sort of inherited? Did you seek him out?
He was, most of the characters were kind of, I hate to put it this way, but kind of the ones that were left from the other writers, and or suggestions from Mike Martz. I had not religiously read the X-Men for a few years, I think, before that. So I didn't really know where things were, or where the characters were, or what was going on with them. I had to go out and spend a small fortune on back issues to research them and find out where they had been. Like, I didn't even know that Havoc had been in that dark alternate universe. So, and pretty much I love all of the characters, and Havoc was one of my favorites because of that old Neil Adams uniform when I was a kid. So but so what would happen is I would get excited about a character, and then I would find out, well, we don't know what happened to Havoc. He disappeared. There was a plane crash and he disappeared. And I was like, well, okay. So now I have to, like, not only do I have to find a way to bring him back to life, but give him a couple of episodes to kind of get his feet under him before I can even turn him into the hero that I'd like to. So, so those are all of the things that, that I actually sort of took as a challenge and as a lot of fun to try to figure out a way to do it. But most of the characters were ones that they asked me to do. I'll even say that sadly for me, North Star was not my first idea. He was, but he was one that, because I thought of him as a pair with his sister. And so, and Mike said, he said, how would you feel about bringing North Star in? People love North Star. And I said, okay, that'd be great. Sure. He's sort of a tip of the hat to an old boss of mine who gave me my first job and who I love dearly. And so I was able to sort of play with him because my friend Steve he's a tremendous, he's a tremendous leader. He's one of those guys who can do anything that he sets his mind to. And so I was able to sort of take that like personality edge and bring it. And this is like what you were talking about before, Dayspring, when you said, you sort of raised the stakes on the stories to deal with the individual personalities. It's like that first story, Fall Down, Go Boom, which is, I think, still one of my favorites, is North Star up until that point is someone who's so good at what he does that he hasn't failed. So I wanted to tell the story where he actually fails and it has an impact on him. And there was some argument back and forth with the editorial department because they kept saying, well, how are we going to get him out of this? How's he going to save the kid? And I said, no, he's not going to save the kid. That's actually how the story is supposed to end. And I remember somebody saying, well, you're going to make people cry and they're not going to like that. Well, but that's sort of the idea, is that you've got to have this emotional punch, this impact on North Star to make him go from being sort of this selfish guy that can do anything and take care of anything to being a member of a team who understands the value of mentoring the young. And so
I think some of those layers that you gave North Star sort of helped to separate him from Quicksilver, who is another kind of selfish, sort of full of himself speedster. And I think you were the first time, it's obviously North Star gay, that's a huge defining trait that separates him from Pietro. But so far as like how he, behaved in the comics and treated other people, you sort of started the trend of moving him away from being just another kind of sassy speedster character. And I really liked it. I enjoyed, whether or not it was your choice to add him to the cast, I'm really glad that he was there.
But that goes to what we were saying earlier, what you said, Flink, that a lot of the decisions you made, Chuck, with Polaris's origin, with even Havoc's, complicated relationship with Polaris and himself and everything he endured is still in the books today. North Star is an X-Man because you brought him onto the team. And I'm even thinking about how you just described his story and how you approached it. That also mirrors his very famous coming out story where he found the baby in the dumpster. And that's sort of like he morphs from this very sassy speedster, as you said, Flink, into this very caring, nurturing individual. And that was, it just goes to show all the thought you put into the run and all that money you spent on the back issues, because that's really present there with the character. And I think that's why at a very impressionable age, I was graduating high school when you were doing your run, why it spoke, that representation matter. It wasn't just having, the gay character on the team. You right. wrote a very well thought out character in North Star.
Yeah. It was important to me. It was really important to me. I had to give a nod to Steve, who was a tremendous mentor in my life. So I wanted to have a character that was that kind of mentor to other people. So it was really important to me. And actually, I read an interview with James Tynion where he said he was influenced by the story where he falls in love with Iceman. And that actually had an impact on him becoming a writer for comics. So
was that ever supposed to go somewhere? I still, to this day, even when Iceman came out, I always thought like, okay, they're going to resolve this North Star Iceman romance because they're run. Did you ever have a longevity with that?
Well, the thing is that, and this is the sort of the tough thing about X-Men is that I had a longevity for every character. I had ideas for where they were all going to wind up and where they were all going to go. I think you've got a question that everybody asks me about Husk and Angel, but that was supposed to have repercussions, and it was a scene that was written because I've known too many young people who have done passionate, but sometimes not well thought out things in their lives, and in my mind, it was far enough away that you couldn't see what was going on. It was just everybody kind of knew what was happening. And then I don't know if it was still in the book or not, but there was a scene where the underwear falls and lands on Nightcrawler's face. So, so there was no question what was going on, but they weren't supposed to be close enough to see it, and they were, pretty much close to the sun, so it wouldn't be that obvious. But I wanted to have Sam, like, dude, that's my sister. So you have all of these grand plans for further on down the road. You never get the chance to get there. And I'm sure Chris feels the same way. I'm sure that he has all these ideas that he wants to get to. And suddenly a character like Wolverine takes off and people want you to do more Wolverine. And so you don't get around to doing that Havoc story that you always had in mind. And I had grand plans for Stacy X. There's a storyline where she was supposed to come back in a way that I think would have surprised a lot of people, and never got around to getting to that story. So
I would love to just know what that story
surprise us.
Gonna be. We're Stacy X fans.
We are.
Oh, really?
Yes, we love Stacy X.
Yeah, I was so grateful to Joe Casey for creating her. She was such a great. I mean, she's what you really want is conflict between characters, and she was just walking, talking conflict.
What she said to Paige, she's like, haha, take that, Baywatch.
Yeah.
And like Paige walks away running, and then, that's the first indication we get with Archangel and her, but, she's like, she's young, don't worry about it. So please go on. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Well, they did. And I guess this goes to your question earlier, were there stories that I wanted to do that I didn't get the chance to do? Well, one of them was they explained Mr. Sinister to me, who always looked sort of ridiculous. I thought I didn't understand. He came in after I was a fan and I didn't know much about him. So Mike explained to me that he was supposed to be the Joseph Mengele of the X universe. And I thought, he's not. I said, do you know who Joseph Mengele is? And Mike goes, yeah, I know who he is, but it's comic books. And I said, well, I have the story idea that now that you brought it up that I would really like to do, where he opens a concentration camp and he kidnaps all of the X-Men and starts performing experiments on them to see how far he can push their mutant abilities. And he has Angel staked out in the middle of this concentration camp, underneath the blazing sun, to see how much his healing powers will work. And he keeps taking samples of his blood. And in the process of doing that, there was this lizard woman character who keeps coming out to take care of him at night. And when nobody else can see, she gives him water, she takes care of him. And we find out later that it was a second evolved Stacy X, that her snakeskin side continued to evolve to the point where, and that's why she left. She saw herself in competition with Paige, and all she could see was, if I'm not pretty, Angel's not going to be interested in me. So she left, and then she has this opportunity to sort of help him out. It goes really wrong, and Angel still has enough left in him to heal her at the end of that story. So
can I tell you, just hearing you talk about all your plans and your approach again, you're such a talented writer, because I have my MFA in writing, and the one thing that you are always taught in the sort of, writing course is you plant the seeds early on and you teach your readers how to read your story, but also paying off your stories. And that's why I think so many narratives that we're obsessed with, it's because you can trace it back. One scene pays off later on. And again, that scene that I just quoted, like, Baywatch, I don't know why Stacy X sounds like that in my head, but that would have paid off later on with that scene you were describing. So
yeah. I mean, I was approaching it as the thing that I felt when I was writing the X-Men is that it works best. And Mike Martz actually said this about my writing at one point. He said, I love your arcs, but he said, your one and dones are just so great. He loved the story about Angel healing the kids while they're digging up I got his name wrong in the comic because I'm a Mad Magazine fan and I don't want to get it wrong now. Skin.
Angelo Espinosa. Yeah.
Thank you. Angelo Espinosa. They're digging up his grave while Angel is healing the kid of the guy who's digging up his grave. And so all of those one-offs or stories are ones that I enjoyed the most because they paid off. The arcs were all of this stuff was supposed to pay off. And I'm sure Chris feels the same way. There's just not enough time. You can't get to it all.
Yeah.
There's so many ideas that you have and you don't control the characters. I mean, I was working towards this idea that I had for where Nightcrawler was going to wind up. And then Davis came back and they gave him Nightcrawler. So, because he wanted Nightcrawler. So, and he's a top tier guy and I'm not. So you have all these grand ideas. You hope you're going to get to them. So yeah, as far as story ideas go, there were tons of them. I couldn't wait to get to the Sam Angel face off over his sister, and but you don't get the opportunity. It just doesn't happen. There's too many characters, too many stories.
Yeah, I mean, but and to our listeners, to be clear, we're the scene that we're alluding to with Archangel, Husk, and Sam. Is from the She Lies with Angels story arc. And after they solve, the problem of the day, Archangel and Husk celebrate by flying off into the air. And as Chuck mentioned, clothes begin falling from the sky, which is, it was kind of a controversial moment at the time. I was a teenager at the time, so I was very amused by it. I thought it was great.
It went over my head. I was like, oh, they flew away and her shoe fell on Nightcrawler's head.
Yeah, to be clear, I do think it was I do think they changed it from panties to a shoe.
It was a shoe. It was her slipper.
But I definitely picked up on what was happening there. But knowing, it. I suddenly think that it's like less controversial after you have explained it a little bit better and like knowing that you were seeding a greater story, because I think that came sort of more at the end of your run. So I don't think you had much of an opportunity to follow up on that. But knowing that you were going to, and there would be, Pretty Blonde Boy versus Pretty Blonde Boy confrontation between Cannonball and Angel. It sounds like a lot of fun to me. So in that
come
context,
back and write it.
I appreciate it a lot more than just a teehee that's dirty kind of moment. But speaking of X-Men couples, one of the major changes you had, I think most of us sort of assumed that Havoc and Polaris would pick right up where they left off, and they kind of obviously Polaris thought that they were going to as well, as she proposed to Havoc. But I am one of the Havoc fans who kind of think they function better as characters when they aren't a couple. So in addition to you inherited kind of crazy Polaris, what was your motivation to split them up?
Well, this is me admitting something I probably shouldn't, but I'm a soap opera fan from way back. And
I knew it when you said what sells are wedding, deaths, and returns. I think Mark Cherry said that about Desperate Housewives, and how at the end of Desperate Housewives you get all three of that in the end because it was a nod to soap operas.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was doing. And people would complain about it. But when I was raised on Marvel Comics, everybody used to complain that Marvel was the soap opera company. So I thought, I didn't invent this. I didn't create it. I'm just kind of, I'm digging in. I'm going further than most people do. So, when you're writing a soap opera, you can't have the happy ending that happen the way you expect it to. And really, once Grant made her crazy, it made it easy. It made it really easy because now her point of view has changed. She was on Genosha. She watched the massacre. It's going to change your point of view. The scene where she takes Xavier and crushes him in the wheelchair, to me is another one of my favorite scenes. I love that whole story. And just so you know, originally Wolverine climbed up to the top of the Magneto sculpture and pissed on it.
My God!
Yeah, but they wouldn't let me do it. It was a little too far.
Really?
And I said, look, they did this on Shogun, when I was in college. And again, no, you can't do it.
Well, yeah, because Wolverine would be so angry because Magneto murdered our God Queen Jean Grey. Yeah. And so it would be I know, it's always motivated. Jean Grey's my favorite character. We're always motivated
made it this far without a mention of Jean Grey. I was really thinking we were going to go all the way.
And Chuck wrote Jean in the Nightcrawler story. She was there. Yeah. And also when Cyclops got the call that Havoc was alive, Jean is in the background. She's like, oh my God. And I'm like, yes, there's Jean. Sorry, Chuck.
No, okay.
Back to Polaris, please.
Yes, go back to Polaris. Back to Polaris.
Yeah. So Polaris, I mean, you want it. The thing that they teach you in writing, and I'm sure now that you know this too, Dayspring, is that it's conflict, it's tension, it's keeping a story moving with surprise and things that are unexpected, not things that are surprising in a way that doesn't make sense. But if Polaris has watched an entire island full of mutants slaughtered, her point of view is now going to be different than Xavier's. It's going to be now different than Alex's. And so I didn't really see a way to be able to put them together anyway at that point, because I saw them as now they've got very different points of view. It's why she's able to do the Xavier gets crushed in the wheelchair scene, which to me, it said everything there was about her point of view now and Xavier's point of view when he says, I will die. That to me is, I will not cross that line. And now she's not sure. It's one of the reasons she puts on the Magneto helmet at the end. It's like, will I go that far? And I know you've got more questions about that and Zorn, and I guess I'll let you guys ask that instead of just
no, please go on. So
go ahead.
We have a friend of the podcast named Amanda Martini, and she's a drag queen, and she did the Polaris in the wedding dress with the helmet at a con. And it is well, first of all, they called her Dragnito.
Oh wow.
Which is great. Amanda was like, I'm owning this. That's the best name ever. But also, it was such an iconic moment. And when you were a reader at the time, there was nothing more iconic in the books right there. When Polaris has that wedding dress and she has a Magneto helmet and she's here like, here comes the bride. Oh, shucks. Now I got this stuck in my head. And she goes after Annie and Havoc. Unpack that for us. That scene, was it Philip Tan who was the artist for that issue? I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but was it the artist who came up with that look? Did you suggest it? What was the process there?
I could be wrong. It could have been the artist. It could have been the editors, but I believe it was in the script because she pulls it together, doesn't she? She makes it. So I would have described that in the script and broken it up by panel. So I imagine that was something that I put in the script, but I wouldn't swear to it if Philip or Mike come along and tell me, no, Chuck didn't come up with that, then fine. But I remember my original intent was to show that she's gone to the other side and she doesn't know, she's just confused and in pain, and this is like the worst possible thing. I think she says it later in the story. It's like, you, on my perfect day, you do this to me on my most perfect day. And it's like how any woman would feel on their wedding day to find out that the guy doesn't want to marry them, that he's not there for them. And so the helmet was to show, for one thing, Polaris had never really had a very defined personality up until that point. So now we were sort of able to give her a really defined personality, a little on the edge, a little darkly funny, and really, really conflicted and confused because she's had this one point of view and now she sees the other point of view so clearly. In some ways, it's like stories that I've heard from in interviews with guys who discovered the concentration camps when they were in World War II. It's that kind of horror that you're faced with that just changes you. You see something that you never in your life expected to see, and it just makes you a different person when you walk out of there.
And that's, so the one scene that always kind of like struck me was when she goes up to Havoc and she's here like, marry me, Alex, and doesn't even wait for him to say yes. Beast, who's the worst X-Man ever, we hate Beast, is like, ho ho ho, congratulations. But now hearing you talk, I get it. Polaris had lived through such an atrocity that getting married to her, her old love, having a beautiful wedding, she's clamoring for that happiness. She wants that stability. And then for Nurse Annie to come in and take it away from her, I understand why she gets all savage.
And she's a human too, on top of it. So,
we can blame Hank McCoy for Polaris's wedding day being destroyed.
You absolutely can blame Hank for anything you want.
Hank McCoy. One question before I turn it back over to Flink. I'm also a huge Wanda stan, and obviously you wrote one of those first scenes where Wanda, Pietro, and Lorna all sit down, and she kind of unveils like, yes, I am also a child of Magneto. When you were writing that scene, did you know a much larger story with Avengers Disassembled and House of M was on the horizon for Wanda, or were you just kind of given free play to do what you wanted with the Scarlet Witch?
I didn't know, but when Mike didn't object, sometimes it was because he knew stuff was coming and he wasn't telling me about it. So so he might have known and approved it because it sort of led into that, or we may have talked about it and I don't remember, but I believe that was just something that I had put in, and that he was fine with.
So it's just fortuitous.
I think it was just fortuitous. Yeah. It was not anything that was planned that I remember, but 20 years ago. So I don't know.
Right. So you mentioned that one of the characters you would have like to continue writing, but didn't get the opportunity to because Alan Davis came in and snatched him up, was Nightcrawler. But you did get to do, have some fun with Nightcrawler and do a fairly big story for him, as we mentioned earlier. It had sort of been a big question mark who his father was all of these years. We knew his mother was Mystique. And you answered that question with Azazel. How did you come up with the idea? What was your motivator there? Obviously, it's got that soap opera angle that we all love. But what were your thoughts on developing that character?
Well, there were sort of two things. I mean, I do a ridiculous amount of research, and sometimes I don't always read it correctly. I mean, I'm not a scientist, so I don't always get it. But I think I got this correct. I may be wrong, but Stephen Gould used to talk about how evolution is not linear. It's not something that just you continue every generation is an improvement upon the last generation. There was something that he called punctuated equilibrium, where you'll go along and suddenly humankind will spit out all of these variations to see which one is successful, and the ones that are successful obviously continue on. But it's not. It's a moment in time. And so I started thinking, well, if that's how it works, has it worked this way all along? And then maybe mutants came along and it didn't last. And so that got me thinking about the second thing that got me thinking about it was the Book of Enoch, which talks about it's a book, I think it's in the Bible, or it's a book that was removed from the Bible, but it's about the angels coming down and mating with humans and creating these monstrous offspring. And so I thought, well, what if
that's definitely not canon.
It's definitely not canon. But I thought, well, what if I think I remember talking to Mike about it. And this is sort of where we were planning on going with the Nightcrawler arc was that, and the Azazel arc is that Azazel is that first sort of punctuated equilibrium where all of these variations of mutants were sort of spit out. And he, at one point, his second in command makes a comment about, I can't believe I remember these words. This is why I questioned the Gambit thing, because I don't remember that. But the second in command says he wears the garb of the angels. And that was supposed to harken back to the fact that there was a battle essentially between the angelic side and the demonic side. They called them the angelic side because they had wings, but they were really all just a bunch of mutants battling it out with each other. That they were the what's called the Nephilim, which is the children of the archangels that came down and mated with humans. So, and then what I figured happened is that the original angels banished them to their nether dimension, and that Azazel and his group didn't die, but they'd been trying to get out for some time. And so there were a number of other characters that had Nightcrawler's teleportation ability. So I thought, what if we tie all of those together? And Azazel has been sort of doing this where he's found a way to get back for short periods of time, mate with humans so that he can create this portal and open it up and come back. And so that was supposed to be that was, I don't know, My Big House of M or something, where the characters would come the Azazel's characters would come through that dimension and try to conquer Earth. So the first part of that story is the one that we did where they're in Azazel's dimension trying to get out. So that was the original concept behind that. Not everything I did I was in love with. So some of those things I'm not sure were working as well as they could have. I don't know if we tipped it well enough, or if we even should have done it. I mean, it's one of those things where people are always saying all the time, should you have these other versions of Nightcrawler because that duplicate his powers? And the original idea was that circle that they form winds up killing them all. So I thought we were kind of getting rid of them and making Nightcrawler special again. But I actually have a page from that story up there. Where
nice.
That's Azazel and Mystique getting it on in church.
as they would. I know, hearing your thought process on all of that and knowing where you really wanted to take it. I wish, Azazel, I think, has only shown up one more time since you wrote him, but I kind of wish that we had gone more in the direction that you just described. That would be, that sounds to me like a really interesting story. And obviously he was nothing like your take on the character, but Azazel did show up in live action in X-Men First Class. How did you feel about that?
It was weird. I didn't find out about it until I saw him in a preview, and somebody said, "Who the heck is that guy?" And I had no idea, but at some point said, "Oh, that's Azazel. He doesn't talk. He doesn't say anything." And I went, "Wait a minute, that's Azazel?" But this was a series that's happening in 1962, and I went, "Okay, it's Marvel. It's Marvel. Yeah, it's whatever they want to do. It's their characters."
The less you think about those X-Men movies and how they gel together, especially in relation to the comics, the better.
Well, and you would have thought they would have solved that, like Azazel and Mystique get together, and that's how you get Nightcrawler in the movies, but they don't even touch upon that. Yeah. And I remember when the First Class preview came out and you saw Jennifer Lawrence, Days of Future Past. You saw Jennifer Lawrence in the hospital. And I remember like breaking down the trailer and be like, oh, that's because it's going to start off with her giving birth to Nightcrawler, and her and Azazel in the gap had gone together, but they never did that. They never covered it.
Oh, interesting.
Nightcrawler never got thrown over a cliff.
Oh my God, wow. We're obsessed with that scene. Wait, do you remember when the art where Mystique does throw baby Nightcrawler off the cliff? You revisit that. Does he bamf away? Is that what happened in it?
I don't think I wrote that. No, he winds up in the river because that's where he's found in a previous, again, tying into continuity.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that scene because there was a bamf, but I don't know. In my head canon, it was always that Azazel came and like saved him, like that you had inserted that piece. But yes, that's exactly.
Oh, maybe.
How it happened. I don't remember.
Maybe that's possible. It could be. Yeah, you know what? That actually sounds right. I think you may be right. You just read it. I'll not give.
The art is murky. The art is murky with it. Yeah. Do you know what scene I'm talking about? Like baby Nightcrawler goes away, and then there's like a bamf effect afterwards. But I don't know if it's just because artistic direction. But anyways, I'm sorry. I digress.
Oh, that's okay.
Another development, you ID'd Nightcrawler's dad, which was great because that was a mystery check off the list. But something else that Joe Casey had done relatively soon before you joined was had Nightcrawler reveal that he was an ordained priest. And then you came in and kind of undid that, which, by the way, I think was the right thing to do. I kind of like Nightcrawler as a conflicted Christian and mutant superhero, trying to like balance the duality of his life. But what was your thought process for reversing that story that had only just kind of happened?
I don't remember clearly, but I think that was actually a request from Marvel that and they actually wanted me to just start it off, if I remember correctly, with him no longer a priest. But I said, no, let's try to tie it into the previous story where we actually give him a reason and a motivation to not want to be a priest anymore. But I believe they wanted to get him back to the sort of the fun swashbuckler character who did have his occasional conflicts and difficulties, but not somebody who was an ordained priest.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that was something that they had asked for.
I think that was absolutely the right thing to do. Like I said, the duality, the duality in his head, him sort of battling his double nature, it was always a much more interesting take on the character.
Well, and speaking of dualities, another character that had so much duality was Iceman.
Yep.
And, in your run, the way I always read your run was that Bobby was still going through his sexuality. He was still in the closet. I mean, for me, the biggest innuendo was when Polaris was like, you don't sleep with someone like Bobby, you sort of adore him. So I was curious about your approach with Bobby, and did you draw upon past innuendos with his, speculation on his sexuality to write him?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to deal with the sort of the sometimes conflicted nature that young men go through, where they're so terrified of how their families are going to respond that they don't admit to themselves what they're really feeling and what they're really going through. So that was the intent, and eventually he and North Star would have found a way to be together, at least.
Yes.
Probably only temporarily, because I don't know if I saw them as long-term partners,
Yeah.
but that was kind of, again, it's one of those places where you think you're going to go, but you never really get the chance or the opportunity to do it. So
were you, because Iceman only came out during the Bendis All New X-Men run, did you ever speak with Mike, who we love Mike Martz here?
Oh yeah, he's awesome.
Did you ever have a chance to speak to him about a potential Iceman coming out story, and were you given the green light for that?
No, it was something that was in my head, but because there was no opportunity coming up where we could deal with it, that I never really brought up and talked to him about it. It was also something that was potentially very controversial, and I didn't want to bring it up until what I thought was the right time. I mean, we're talking 20 years ago, and there were also people very angry about North Star. So there were more people that loved him and more people that were excited about it. But sometimes, like with She-Ra, you just have to do the right thing. It's more about going in the right direction and going in a positive direction. I mean, I have a cousin who got in touch with me because of She-Ra and Kipo in the Age of the Wonder Beasts, and said, look, thank you, thank you for these characters. So to me, that's important, and that's something that you need to do. I don't pretend to be the guy who's necessarily the right one to write those stories, but at the time, nobody else was doing it. So I thought, I'll do it. And now you get somebody like James Tynion, he could probably write a much better story than I could. But
I would love a James Tynion Iceman story. We need to will that into existence. but I mean, for readers like us, we're both gay men, and at the time, we didn't know for sure that Iceman was in fact gay, but with the context, knowing that he is now, you look back on moments, from a lot of different writers actually, but certainly in your run, the Polaris relationship between Bobby and Bobby and Polaris always seemed kind of forced and awkward, and even without it being overt, Bobby is gay. I always kind of read some of those scenes as Bobby was maybe actually a little in love with Havoc, and I don't know if that was your intent or not, but that is sort of context that I can apply to it now that we know 100% that Bobby is gay. Did you have any sort of was that what you intended, or did I just put like a whole bunch of vibes on something that weren't there?
No, I mean, I don't know. I was playing it. Again, a lot of this stuff is just based on continuity and previous comments and things that have been made in previous issues, including that great scene in the movie where his mom says, well, can't you just not be a mutant? So I wanted to play, maybe I was playing with that unconsciously, but I was not doing it consciously. Because for me, I mean, I'm such a romantic that when you sort of start the North Star story, you want to finish the North Star story. Sure. So I wasn't thinking as far as Alex yet. But I don't know if it's not like it'll ever happen, but if I ever had a chance to write the X-Men, maybe it'll be something that I'll play with. So we'll see.
Well, we're going to will that into existence. Right. They do have a line called X-Men Legends, where they bring back old writers to sort of, tie up loose threads. So we will will that. Wow. Jordan D. White Jordan D. White, you heard it here. Chuck, one final Iceman question, because one scene that I loved, and maybe I still haven't been able to fully process it, but I wanted you to unpack it for me, was in that last arc of yours, Iceman, I think the last time you wrote Iceman, he's in a room in his bedroom. It's dark, and he's looking at a photo of him and Annie, and also of him and Polaris. And I'm curious if you remember writing that scene and sort of what was going through Iceman's thoughts at that time.
I don't remember writing that scene, so I would only be guessing as to what it was. But I mean, I think, I can't remember. I can't remember what to relate.
It is such, Chuck, when I tell you the panel was like this big, when I tell you it was that big, like no one probably noticed it.
I didn't.
Yeah, and if Flink did not notice it, it's because I'm crazy. But it was just a very tender scene. And speaking to you now, I didn't want to put words in your mouth, but I can sort of surmise he's coming to terms with who he is and sort of these past people that he's had relationships with, and sort of all that hate that's come at him, and him coming to terms with who he is.
If I ever put in a moment where a character was sort of silently looking at something, it was always to convey some kind of underlying emotion. So, so I think you're right in that that's what I was attempting to do, but I don't know. I can neither confirm nor deny.
Fair enough.
So we did touch on Juggernaut quite a bit earlier, but something that we didn't mention was the trial of Juggernaut, and
She-Hulk.
It can be.
Oh yeah, that's
okay, but
coming.
more than just the controversial moment, of course. It is fairly uncommon in superhero comics to actually see heroes or villains be held accountable for their actions in a court of law. What made you want to put Kane on trial? Was it just more of an effort to legitimize him, like you were speaking about earlier, or was it just an opportunity to write, a different kind of superhero story?
It was an attempt to show that he was. I mean, there were a couple of reasons for it. Well, one. I asked Ron Garney one day what he wanted to draw. He doesn't remember this, but it's true. I asked Ron Garney what he wanted to draw, and he said, I want to draw She-Hulk and Juggernaut in bed after they've had the greatest sex ever. And I went, okay, I'll write that scene.
Fantastic. So it's Ron Garney's fault. We'll send the internet trolls after Ron Garney.
Yes, and if there are trolls about that, have the trolls go after Ron.
I want that to happen on She-Hulk. Bring in Kane and let her find Kane.
Well, for me, it was the idea that these were two characters who had issues. I mean, sleeping with your lawyer is a terrible, terrible idea.
Terrible idea.
And I think that's one of the things is if people are upset about it, a lot of times they're upset about what you would sort of take the logical conclusion to be, not recognizing that people in moments of passion will do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've done things that I was embarrassed about at the time. I've known other people who have done unbelievable things that they're embarrassed about and got caught doing. So the idea that their passions can kind of get out of control was a big part of that for me. But it was also this idea that Juggernaut was sort of driven by his passions and not really thinking about the consequences of his actions. So here he has to face the consequences of all of his actions. And I think if I remember, there's a 2-page spread where he's strapped up and she's reading off this litany of things that he's done and the crimes that he's committed. And in the middle somewhere, he says, I paid for that. There's a bar that gets wrecked or something. And he talks about, I paid for that. So there's like that one moment where he's trying to say, look, I try, I do my best. But I am a bit of a passionate guy. And that was a big part of his arc and his storyline, was kind of learning that in the real world, if you want to be a better person, you have to kind of control that stuff. Everybody has those passions and those feelings, but you can't always act on them. You can't just go with it. And so that, again, leading into the J2 stuff where he becomes a responsible father married to a lawyer. Yeah. So yeah, I did read J2.
We need to do a read of it on this podcast because
It's so much fun.
Is it? I
was
googled
fun.
the art whilst we were talking. It looks amazing.
And am I remembering correctly? Did Ron Garney do the art for J2? I feel like he was
Oh.
heavily involved in that universe at some point. I might just be making stuff up. But
Yeah, I don't know for sure. I don't know
for sure either. I might just be making things up. Internet, don't come for me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So that what you were talking about of Kane sleeping with his lawyer and how that's like a moment of passion. Does that kind of parallel what was going on with what you were saying earlier about Angel and Husk?
It sort of,
that he had that passion and there were going to be consequences for that later on.
yeah. Sometimes you do things that, they feel right in the moment, and they're mistakes, or sometimes they're not mistakes, but everybody else kind of needs to settle down about it. For me, again, it's writing a story, it's writing conflict into a story and setting up conflict for later in the story. So the fact that She-Hulk sleeps with Juggernaut was going to have consequences. And the fact that She-Hulk had issues of her own. I mean, I think at the time she was sort of dealing with kind of the multiple personality thing, or some kind of a personality conflict about, being She-Hulk and being a lawyer and remembering stuff. And so she does something that she really shouldn't do either, and she knows better than to do. For me, I love setting up those moments where people do what feels good in the moment, and it winds up biting them in the ass somehow. So, even if it's putting a Magneto helmet on and destroying the entire wedding venue. So,
Oops.
It's okay. It's Popo. It's Popo.
Oh my gosh. Well, so I mean, speaking, a little bit more about Paige. What was it that made you want to? There's a million mutants in the Marvel universe. What made you want to promote Paige specifically to the big leagues? Because to that point, she had only appeared in Generation X, and she was kind of supporting in that as well. She was. I wouldn't say that she was really one of the leads. She was kind of secondary in that, and you automatically, as soon as that book ends, kind of thrust her into the big leagues.
Yeah, she it wasn't my intent. And again, she was one of those characters that they asked me to put in, and she was not a character that I was familiar with. And I wound up kind of falling in love with her a little bit. She was a terrific character, so much personality. And there was really honestly one question that I asked Mike that he didn't have an answer for. And I thought, oh my God, how do we not know this? I have to write a story about it. And here we go. This is for you, Dayspring. This is another story that I didn't do, but I really, really wanted to. I asked Mike, I said, so what happens to these skins after she sheds them? And Mike just kind of looked at me with this blank expression on his face and kind of shrugged. He didn't know. And I said, what if there's a guy that follows her around and collects them?
Oh, that would be fun.
Yeah. And I thought, so at that point, I wanted to do that particular story. And that was going to be the sort of the Sam story. Is like he's trying to get to her to rescue. Warren is trying to get to her to rescue her. And Sam is pissed off and beating the crap out of Warren about what happened. And the only way that Warren can get out of it is he just lets him. He says, "You're right. I shouldn't have done it. Not in front of your mom. It was a mistake." And Sam just keeps beating the crap out of him until finally he stops. And he says, "Now will you help me to get your sister?" And it's like Sam goes, "What?" Because he wouldn't stop long enough. Again, people acting in moments of passion. So that story was that there's this guy that's collecting her skins, very much like some kind of weird Buffalo Bill character. Or Buffalo Bob, but which one is it from Silence of the Lambs?
Buffalo Bill.
Buffalo Bill.
I think it's Bill. You were right.
Yeah, you were right.
And he's got all of these weird skins pinned up in his apartment, and he finally decides that he wants her to start making unique skins for him. So he kidnaps her. So that's the
then it's unveiled that was Nurse Annie's first husband.
It all comes back.
The
to
Nurse Annie questions are coming. The Nurse Annie questions are coming.
You set up the seeds, and the plant grows by the end.
Well, before we dive into Nurse Annie, I do want to circle back a little bit to Generation X, because it does seem like you incorporated. Jubilee was a part of your run. Husk, I think Monet may have even showed up at one point as well. Maybe So were you you were unfamiliar with the character of Husk before? I mean, I'm sure you were aware of Jubilee, but did you go back and read any of Generation X
Oh
to
yeah.
prepare to write these characters?
Oh sure. Yeah. That's where I came up with the question of where do her skins go? Because she kept,
Yeah.
every time she'd throw off these skins and go off in battle, and I never saw what happened to the skins. And so
Yeah.
I asked Mike one day. So yeah. Oh yeah. I read them.
Yeah. Were you a fan? Did you enjoy them?
Yeah, I was. There are other books that I like better, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the characters. And I think that's always the strength of any series is its characters and their interaction, their relationships.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we got to ask though about the Generation X kids. You crucified them on the mansion lawn, and thankfully Jean Grey telekinetically brought them down and rushed them to the infirmary. So can you tell us? I know, I'm sorry, Flake.
No, it's fine.
But can you what was your decision process like for that? It was a very harrowing scene, and obviously one has stuck with readers 20 some years later.
That was actually born of the original thought for the first movie was going to be that it was based on God Loves, Man Kills. So they were looking for some sort of quasi-religious theme to books that were going to be on the shelves when the movie was out. And they also wanted to get rid of characters whose powers duplicated other more famous characters in the universe. So Skin, characters like that. So it was kind of a double thing where I said, okay, I've got this image in my head, and they said, run with it. So that was where we went with it. In retrospect, I probably would have handled it differently. And I always regret getting Angelo's name wrong, but that's, that my mind works in tangents, and I'm a Mad Magazine fan. So Angelo Torres is a very famous artist who I used to emulate when I was younger. And Angelo Esposito is obviously Skin's name. So I got it wrong, but it got through 2 readouts at Marvel. So I wasn't the only one responsible for it. But if you're going to kill a character, you want to get his name right. It's a very famous quote. It's almost as famous as, if there's a gun on the table in the first act, it better be fired by the third. If don't kill a character off screen, especially a character that people love. So the fact that all these characters were killed and executed and just sort of left on the lawn was a great shock moment, but it was not a particularly strong story moment. So that's where I'm saying that sometimes I'm not always satisfied with the stuff. When I look back at it, I think it could have been better, but you're dealing with 22 pages at that point. I think it was 22 pages a month, and you're trying to get in as much as possible. So sometimes you go for, as Stephen King says, sometimes you go for the gross out moment over the suspense. So.
Yeah, and I mean, it still was even though a lot of it happened off panel, it was still a very impactful scene. I am one of the aforementioned Skin fans, so I was devastated by it. But at the same time, I also understand, I never got mad about it because comics are comics, and he's back. He's back. It did take a little bit longer, but he is finally back. So I know nothing is. You just can't take it personal because nothing is permanent in X-Men comics. So.
Yeah, and we had Agustin Rodriguez, who did Skin in the Generation X movie on the podcast, and he loved the character, and the character still resonates with the people today.
I think that's really important too. I think when the last show that I worked on at DreamWorks was How to Train Your Dragon, and the idea that we had a diverse cast was amazing. That all of these kids from different worlds, they didn't have to be Norwegian and white to have a dragon. And so I think that's really important. I think that, any little kid growing up out there should have a hero of their own. And looking back on it now, I think that we were all too eager sometimes to kill off characters, not realizing that they were somebody's favorite. And, everybody should have a favorite, and they should be allowed to have a favorite. And honestly, I'm glad they brought Skin back. I think
we still need more of him. We still need more panel time with Skin, but at least he is alive.
Good. Glad to hear it.
Chuck, we're going to enter the Oprah section
of
the interview right now.
You want to know about my feelings, or you're going to make me cry?
Oh, no, even better. We're going to ask about the creation of Nurse Annie. How did Nurse Annie come to be? How did you conjure up this nurse goddess?
there was so much about the X-Men that was isolationist, that they have this school that is, in a sense, discriminating against people without mutant powers by not having humans there. And and it's the same. It's the thing where you can say you have to balance it in one direction to offset the mistakes that other people are making in the rest of the world. But it can make it for a very exclusionary experience. And in some ways, it's kind of like what's going on now with a lot of the sort of the conservative push to change the meaning of the Civil War, and that different people are learning different things about different cultures from a skewed perspective in ways that I think are going to wind up being harmful to the kids as they're growing up, because they're, imagine getting older and you're thinking of things or doing things based on a misperception of the reality of the world out there. So at that time, 20 years ago, what I was looking to do was, Xavier looking at her and saying, look, we get injured all the time. We need somebody to help take care of people. Let's bring her in. And he was also at the time thinking of, seeing who she was and recognizing that she was basically a good person. And the fact that I was raised by a single mother, it was something that I wanted to kind of deal with, this idea that a woman could be strong on her own, even though she may want love and she may want the things that she was hoping to get for with Alex. That wasn't her be all and end all. Mostly it was just earning a living and being a good mother. And that mothering quality is something that I kind of wanted to bring into the X-Men. They had a father, but I felt that they needed a mother as well. And so that was the thinking originally. I loved I loved her as a personality. I loved the fact that she was strong and weak at the same time, that she had, she had her love for Alex, but she was also willing to sort of back off and accept that he was going to get married to somebody else, and that they had loved each other for a long time. And Polaris may have gotten a little nuts on her, but at the same time, she sort of understood, where that was coming from. So,
she has that scene when Xavier goes into Polaris's head and sees everything that happened to Genosha, and then the last scene is Nurse Annie under the table, like in terror after reliving Lorna's memories.
And that's another aspect of it too. Is humans, in order for mutants to become a part of the bigger world, humans have to understand them better. Yeah. So now Annie is going to be one of those people who gets it. And originally when she left, she was going to kind of take that out into the world with her, along with her son. So that was the original thinking. Again, a viewpoint character who brought something to the mix that wasn't really there before, that I really wanted as a part of the series. And they were willing to let me do it. But God, people hated her so much.
Listen, I'm a huge Sailor Neptune fan who has like aqua blue hair. So seeing Nurse Annie in the comics at the time, I gravitated towards her. So, but yes, there was a lot of, there still is Nurse Annie hate.
Yeah.
Which I don't really, I don't feel, hearing you talk about her and her development and you wanting to develop a sort of a mother character for the X-Men because they already had a father. I actually really like that angle. I was kind of indifferent to the character before. I'm kind of walking away from this, liking her maybe a little bit more. But I will say, I always thought she was a very brave character because she stuck around for all of the X-Men shenanigans, and she went through all of the relationship soap opera with Alex, and she stuck it out for as long as she could. So even, with my, at the time, indifference to her, I still recognized, the importance of her and that she was, a brave character. I think you really got that across. But yeah, she isn't a character that we have actually seen a whole lot of, or I don't think we've seen her really at all since your run. But she did have a fairly memorable exit for those of us who are fans of your run. The last we saw them as they're leaving the mansion, we saw a pair of eyes floating in one of the panels there. Who is that supposed to be? I feel like over the years we've all sort of thought that it was Cassandra Nova, but was that what you intended?
It was actually what I intended, and she had been drawn in there fully. There wasn't just the eyes. They sort of they thought about it more after they got it and took out most of the rest
What
of
a
her. And just had
bummer.
the eyes. But it's funny because she was not there originally. Originally, Carter was in the back, sort of air juggling metallic objects. The idea being that he had Magneto's powers, and that, something in that area, something in that direction. And Mike and I talked about it, and he said, well, we want to kind of bring Cassandra Nova back at some point because she's such a great villain. How about if we, instead of doing that, we have Carter sitting on one side and Cassandra Nova as a kind of a ghost is sitting next to him. And I said, look, they're your characters. I'm leaving the book. You can do whatever you want. And he said, yeah, let's do that. So I saw the artwork. I think it was Sal that drew that. And Sal had put her fully in the seat, and she was sitting there with this really evil, sinister smile looking right at Carter. And then when the book came out, it was just the eyes. So I think, there was it's just that thought process. Everybody's second guessing themselves and trying to figure out how to do it. And I think that's,
So that was a goodbye scene from you as a writer. That wasn't a story that just never came into fruition. You purposely ended it on that note for another writer, who I believe was Peter Milligan, to come up and take, or Chris Claremont, who did Uncanny.
Yeah, I mean, I thought people hated Annie so much they were she'd just be gone and they'd leave her alone, and that Carter would never be seen again. So yeah, I thought that was basically me saying, okay, I'm done. If you guys want to do something else with her, great. That's like when I did the new Captain Britain in the Avengers, there's another character who was a single mother that I really liked a lot. But then once you're gone, nobody else likes them, so nobody else wants to use them, and they just kind of fall into obscurity. So that's what I expected to happen with Annie.
Well, since now that I'm thinking about it, Annie did actually show up. Claremont actually used Annie. I'm not sure if you've read it, but he did X-Men: The End, which was like, the last X-Men story, and Havoc actually ended up. Claremont wrote Havoc. His happy ending was with Nurse Annie
and Carter. In some kind of like Carter created like a space for them, and they were dead, but they were living across from the mansion. I forgot how the story went.
Yeah, I don't remember the details. It wasn't, Claremont's finest story. It was a little all over the place, but it was there. Nurse Annie and Carter did actually show up again. Just came to me.
Interesting. Okay. Well, nice, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay. So our final questions are about Zorn. And obviously you brought in a second Zorn, and I'm still confused about him. And I'm curious how editorially that he was explained to you, because he was Magneto, and then he was someone else posing as Magneto, and then he became the Collective later on. So how was Zorn explained to you when you were crafting your own version of the character?
Grant wasn't sharing initially, I think, what plans were for Zorn. It was, and I think that's some of the reason that there's this sense of who is he? He was always Magneto, or was he not? Because I'm not sure Grant fully followed through with that. And this actually came out of the Genosha story, where I had Wolverine pissing on the statue, because Mike and I talked about it, and he said, well, something else that people always want to see is, a great funeral. So let's have all of the mutants show up on Genosha to have a funeral for Magneto. And my conversation with Mike big parts of it wound up being the conversation between Xavier and Wolverine, where I was saying, what Grant did is turned Magneto into Osama bin Laden. He killed all of these people. He flipped the bridge. He did all of this crazy stuff. People died left and right. That's horrific. And Mike and I talked about it back and forth, and he said, I don't know if we can do that. So it hadn't, because so much of the death in that was sort of, distant and from far away. You didn't see a lot of like dead bodies crushed and stuff the way that they were described to be. I don't think it quite sunk in. So Mike said, well, let's discuss this and we'll get back to you. So the decision was to take Zorn back the other way and make it so that he was never really Magneto. He was Zorn, He said, how would you do that? And I said, well, Zorn is supposed to have a star for a brain. Maybe he has a twin brother that's got a black hole for a brain. So that's kind of what we did. And so that way Zorn was actually the mass murderer who killed all of those people. So
and Jean Grey.
And Jean Grey. He just did horrible stuff. So
we could never forgive Magneto if it was him killing Jean Grey, but Zorn.
Some of us could.
Yeah. And yeah.
Eject my co-host.
Okay. Yeah. So speaking of black hole brains, our last question for this interview, and thank you so much for going as long as you have. We can start rambling when we get excited. But what did you intend to happen to the Brotherhood when Zorn sucked them into his black hole brain? Did you have an idea of a cool direction where that could go, or you were kind of on your way out at that point, and that was just a seed for someone to deal with later?
That was just a seed for someone else to deal with later. I had no thought of anybody else would get him back. So
I honestly can't even remember how they came back. I think they were just kind of just back. I don't really remember. So yeah. I'm sure you would have written a really great story about it, but whoever picked up that plot point did not do a great job, I guess, because it's not memorable.
Chuck Austen, we have been speaking to you for 2 hours.
Oh my God! Wow.
We're sorry for keeping you. Are there any upcoming projects that you're working on that folks at home should be aware of? Let's put it on the radar. What do you have coming down the pipeline?
Nothing that I am contractually allowed to talk about.
Hey, that in itself is very exciting to hear.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, there's a couple of things coming, and the Edgeworld trade is out, and that's. But I mean, the fact is that I haven't been doing comics for a really long time, and Edgeworld was sort of my first step back into it, and that's led to other things. So I'm grateful. I'm enjoying it. I'm having a lot of fun writing comics again. But yeah, I can't really talk about anything that I'm doing at the moment.
It's fair. It's fair. And well, we're just going to say that we're glad that you're back doing comics. That you were away for too long.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Where can listeners at home who now love Nurse Annie engage with you and let you know their love about Nurse Annie? Are you on any socials anywhere?
I am. I mean, Facebook. I'm on Facebook for basically for business reasons for the most part. So it's not really so much a personal site as it is me just getting on there and talking about the business, primarily animation, because that's what I work in most now.
And I want to give a big shout out to Chad from Gray Malk and Lane podcast, because we're going to be on a future episode, and that's how we sort of connected. So Chad, such a wonderful show. Everyone go check out Gray Malk and Lane. We're going to be on it, and Chuck's going to be on it, and it's going to be a fun time.
It will be. Absolutely. If you guys are going to be there, it'll be a blast. So thanks so much for making the time.
It'll be 2 more hours.